Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. It's been ages since I've posted. I've got 3 little kids in the house, as some of you might know. The youngest of which is 7 months now. She's doing well, but man, it's hard work for mum and dad. Anyway, today I figured I would talk about one of my favorite bands actually, and I think it's definitely a band that was a cornerstone of my direct influences, like on my own music. Something that when I heard, I was like, yeah, more like that. And you know, almost like, shit, why didn't I think of that? And that of course is Opeth. And yet in recent years, they're a band I've completely lost touch with. And if you're watching this and you know of Opeth, then obviously I'm sure you would probably guess why. But yeah, I was introduced to Opeth in I would say probably early to mid 2000s. My bass player in the band at the time, his younger brother was an avid music collector. And as older folk, I'm 40 now, born in 84, so like my friend and I, we'd spend our life buying CDs, tapes before that and CDs. And the record stores, particularly growing up in South Africa, the record stores would only stock, I guess, what you would call the safe bet, so like big enough bands. Now, don't get me wrong, you go into a metal section and you'd find the likes of Slayer or Deicide or Cannibal Corpse or something like that, but they had to be pretty well established acts by then to even stand a chance of being in the record store's catalogue. And a band like Opeth at the time wasn't. That being said, because of the rise of things like Napster and that kind of thing, and just in general like MP3, his younger brother had discovered the sort of Scandinavian metal scene at the time. Which, as I said, it wasn't really being pushed. There were record companies starting to pick them up, but like, say, for example, the likes of Nuclear Blast, even Century Media and stuff like that, they were still pretty underground, I guess you could say. Anyway, he had picked up on a load of these bands, and there were a few bands that had sort of come to my attention via his recommendation. Opeth was one, and along with like bands like Dimmu Borgir and Immortal, Emperor, stuff like that, which I hadn't heard before. And it was a breath of fresh air, really, because, growing up, the 2 main bands that really inspired me from a metal perspective were, old school Metallica and Megadeth. And what I always loved about those 2 bands was this sort of musicality. There was a complexity, and the orchestration and arrangements and things like that. Not to mention that the playing was good on the records, particularly in Megadeth's case. I mean, like, the playing is astounding. But those early Metallica records, you'd have trouble kind of splitting them off unless you were a pretty well accomplished guitar player or something like that. Then you could maybe compare like the solos or something like that and be like, oh yeah, Megadeth's still got the edge. But the early days of Metallica hold up pretty well against any Megadeth record. Anyway, I digress. The point is, there was a musicality to it, and then what happened was in the 90s, new metal hit. And don't get me wrong, during that period there were bands that I liked. Fear Factory, for example, is again one of my favorite bands, but they went in a different direction. So with the emergence of new metal, you had kind of rap influences and stuff like that coming in, and my friends and I it just wasn't really cutting the mustard, so to speak, for us. Whereas, say, a band like Fear Factory had more of a fundamental death metal kind of aggression to it. They weren't trying to like swing the beats and stuff like that. There was a real sledgehammer crunch to it. So we enjoyed that sort of stuff. But what I was finding was there wasn't that much of that to go about. Obviously, I had some Slayer records that came out that were pretty good. I enjoyed Diabolus in Musica by Slayer at the time. I thought that was a great record. In fact, it's probably the record that really got me into Slayer. I wasn't properly into Slayer before that. I'd heard Rain of Blood and stuff like that. but I hadn't really got into them. I think the production on their earlier records maybe kind of hurt it. I like quite a punchy, crisp, clear production. I didn't really have that. Anyway, huge segue there. Back to Opeth. So I got introduced to them, and I'm pretty sure I got introduced to them with, well, 3 records really. So it would have been Deliverance and Damnation, which I think were not long out by then. And the Blackwater Park album. God, really had to search for that. And, you know, I was hugely impressed by that because it had such precision and, again, that orchestration, that depth of musicality. There was lead guitar work, didn't have to be flashy solos, but there was incredible melodic content to the music. And Michael Oakefeldt's vocal, I'd never heard, the most death metal vocals to me, and there's no offense to anybody who listens to this stuff, but most death metal vocals to me sound kind of like Cookie Monster, right? You know, you can't really pick out the words and stuff like that, and the phrasing is kind of really uniform, and to me it kind of grates on my ears after a while, and it, you know, kind of just blends into the background. So when it comes to more traditional death metal, I'm actually not that into it, but when I do listen to it, I'm probably usually, a lot of times I'm listening to the instrumentation more than I am the vocal. But here was a band that had an incredible vocalist. Sounded very demon-like, but very expressive all at the same time. And then obviously had these clean passages which, you know, caught your ear because you were like, wow, okay, this guy can really do both. You know, he can really live in both of those worlds. And they had that juxtaposition and contrast, and it made it work really well. Anyway, so getting into those 2 records, that caused me then to go and chase down the back catalogue, and so I bought Orchid, Morning Rise, and My Arms Rehearse, and obviously some fantastic classic songs on there. Production-wise, obviously, they don't, you know, have the sort of edge of the records that followed. But there's just classic, undeniable tracks on there where the DNA of the band is already established and coming together. You know, I'm thinking, I mean, like a song like Demon of the Fall, like I can't help it every time I hear that song. It's perfect. It's perfect in every way. For an Opeth track, it is the perfect balance. And then I moved to the UK, and that was around 2005, and around then Ghost of R Aries came out. And for me, it's my favorite, personally speaking, it's my favorite Opeth record. It has the cutting edge production, the punch, the clarity, all of that kind of stuff is there. But I think they'd learned from a few mistakes they'd made from earlier records where perhaps they were a little bit, well, Michael Oakefeldt used to say that they would go in a bit unprepared and they hadn't rehearsed and things like that. So I think they were doing a lot of things on the fly. And don't get me wrong, the results speak for themselves, are phenomenal, classic records. Blackwater Park, Deliverance, Damnation. Oh, and on the topic of Deliverance and Damnation, I didn't mind that double record because, you know, you got a record of the good stuff and then you got the record of the mellow stuff. And because it wasn't going to be record after record after record, or in my head at the time, I didn't mind, you know, and it made for the cool live show that they did. I think it was live in London, maybe in the Astoria or something like that, I can't remember. I've got the DVD somewhere at home, but I can't remember the name of it. Lamentations, you dummy, in Shepherd's Bush. Anyway, so that was a cool. Ghost of R Aries came out. I remember playing that to my father, and it really grew on him. At first, he didn't like it. The vocals were a bit too intense. I think he didn't even believe that a human could be capable of some of the drumming that you find in extreme metal. But you know, he grew to like the band, and you know, I played him the live DVDs and stuff like that, and he was like, clearly these guys are great musicians. He couldn't take it often, but I think he really respected them. And yeah, phenomenal record. For me, it had the perfect balance of all the elements. And then something happened, you know, on Watershed, which is still not a bad record, don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people really like Watershed. Obviously you've got a new guitar player coming in. There was a bit of shred stuff on there, and it's okay. I don't mind it, you know. I don't mind the guy as a guitar player, and he's stuck with the band ever since. But I didn't think Opeth was really a shreddy band. I didn't think they needed any shred, if I'm honest. But overall, Watershed wasn't a bad record, but it didn't captivate me in the same way as the previous records. To me, it just didn't have those kind of outstanding classics. You know, I can't point to a single song on there and be like, that one, you know. Like, I can't even recall the names. So already, they're starting to lose me a bit. And I think that had a lot to do with them starting to get bored, unfortunately. Fast forward a few years, I was working at Anderton's Music at the time, and I remember Heritage came out, and I rushed out to buy it. And I remember listening to it in the record store first and thinking, okay, this is really different. But you know what, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to give it a chance. I still got the record at home. It is a good prog rock record. And I'm sure a lot of the subsequent records have been good prog rock records. But they're not the kind of prog rock I'm into. You know, when I listen to prog, if it's metal, it's more like Dream Theater, where it is technical, precise, cutting. The production is pristine, for lack of a better term. When I listen to other kinds of prog, like Yes, it's for a different reason. Very different sort of type of songcraft, and very different use of keyboards and that sort of thing. Opeth decided to go very much the other kind of acid prog 70s route. It's just a bit too much for me. You know, there's Mellotron over everything and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was just, one record was enough, so I can appreciate Heritage for what it is. But after that, I just never bought another Opeth record again. And I feel like it was such a loss for the metal world. You know, it was about time, around that time, it was about time that you started to have bands that emerged that were incredibly musical. They had this musical depth to them. Because in my opinion, as Metallica started losing their game through the 90s, and then on through the 2000s where it got really bad with Saint Anger, there was like a void left there for other people to walk into, and very few people did. Obviously Megadeth checked out a little bit on Risk, but then they kind of found their mojo again and started coming back towards the heavy stuff. I don't know, it's one of those things. I mean, you can't really blame Opeth. You know, it's different when it's done for creative reasons, and they are genuinely they just get bored. It's their band, they can do whatever they want with it, right? Who am I to say do or bah or whatever? But still, I miss them. I miss them in their old incarnation. And I've heard other people that sort of copy that, I guess, or I'm not going to say try to copy it, but it's, I guess, for lack of a better expression, they've failed to be creative enough to mask the Opeth influence. You know, so when you listen to their music, you're like, oh, that's an Opeth fan, and you can hear it straight away. But none of those acts I've heard have been able to conjure up the songs and the sound that hits the heights that Opeth reached in what I would consider to be their peak. And their peak is arguably, depending on the fan who you talk to, is anywhere between probably My Arms, Your Hearse, and you know, if you're totally focused on songs and you really like the old school stuff. Oh, and Still Life is an unsung hero as well. I really like that record as well. And they're starting to, the production is starting to step up as well. Great record. But anyway, yeah, it's during that sort of peak is anywhere from there all the way through Still Life, Deliverance and Damnation, Blackwater Park, all the way through to Ghost River Aries. And then, you know, you've got a lot of fans that hold Watershed up that high as well. And you think, so there's what is it, 6 or 7 records or something like that, where they're just bang, 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 and it's getting better and better and better, and there's momentum, and then they were just nah, we're done with that, we're moving on, bye-bye. And what a shame, yeah. So anyway, this is how the short story of how I lost touch with one of my favorite bands. I still treasure the records that I've got, but I haven't followed them since. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you think? Did you get into the prog, the more sort of acid prog stuff from Heritage onwards? And what's your favorite Opeth record? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.